Hi, I'm John Ballantyne, and welcome to another edition of On the Marquee. Our sponsors this time around, Dr. John Cox and the Photo Place in Austintown. Our guest today is a very familiar face, but he's best known as a songwriter, a cabaret performer, a music instructor, as well as a music director. And I speak of Mr. Rick Blackson. Rick, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure, Jay. Yeah, good to be with you.
You're, as I said in the intro, primarily known as a musical entertainer. How did you get your start in music and then dovetail into theater?
The musical part of it started when I was a little kid, about 4 years old. There was a keyboard in my dad's furniture store, like a little chord organ they call them. And I was, like any little kid, it was like a little toy, so I would want to come up and mess around with it. And there was a lady that worked for my dad at that time in his furniture store over in Mercer, Pennsylvania, that knew a little bit about playing an organ or something. So I knew my numbers and letters, and so I was able to coordinate the numbers and the letters pretty well, more than probably most little kids would, I guess, at that time. And when I was 6, my dad bartered with a guy that bought some furniture from him who happened to own a little piano store out in near Greenville, Pennsylvania, and got a piano and started me on piano lessons, and that's where it started. And then over the years, I was playing more and more. By the time I was about 12 or 13, like a lot of kids, I didn't want to do it anymore. You know, they had to beg me to practice, and I wanted to quit.
I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, so I quit official piano lessons when I was around, I think, 12. And then, but around that same time, I still kept playing. I was interested in it. And what really got me started was, and Mary Jo's heard me tell this story many, many times, and so have other people. There was a girls' trio at the church I was going to at the time. They were all three a little bit older than me. And I remember one of the girls was trying to accompany herself, and she was struggling with the song. And I thought, well, I think I could play that song. And if I could play that song, I could maybe be their accompanist, and that would be pretty cool, you know.
There you go.
So that's kind of that was an inspiration for me to start wanting to play again a little bit more. And I started just playing a lot and continued to do it. Got involved in, my mom took me over to audition for Boardman High School's choral music department to see if I could be an accompanist. I didn't really want to do that, but she, talked me into it, and they thought I was good enough to do that. So that kind of got me into reading music a little bit more and got a little bit more of exposure to different styles of music. Then in high school, by the time I was a junior in high school, I didn't even really know what musical theater was. I thought Hello Dolly was a song. I didn't know anything about shows or anything like that. And Mr. Dykins needed an accompanist. He was the director of all the shows at Boardman High School. He needed an accompanist for Kismet, which was a musical that they were doing during my junior year. So during those rehearsals, I remember watching him, and I was fascinated, just watching how he worked and how he worked with the kids and how he just got them so enthusiastic and got all this emotion out of them and everything, and how he worked with the guy on comic timing and every aspect of like how you can get a bigger laugh out of a smaller moment, things like that, just by moving your eyes a certain way or just by the way that you waited just that extra split second. I was fascinated by all that, and I thought I could do that. I think I could do that. So I auditioned to be in a show my senior year, and I got the role of Horace Vandergeller in Hello Dolly.
Okay. I didn't know you did that show.
Yeah.
That's a great role.
So that's the background in a nutshell of just some of my basic music experience. In addition to that, playing at my mom and dad's church, playing the piano there was a big, important part of my playing on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And again, developing more reading skills, being able to read 4-part harmony in the hymn books. And after high school, playing in bands. I started playing like in bands that played at wedding receptions and played at a little bit of nightclub stuff. Then in college, playing in a jazz band format, getting a little exposure to that kind of style.
Now, would you say, you said you had music lessons, piano lessons for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say you're more self-taught, or you relied heavily on the music lessons?
The music lessons taught me the foundational stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and taught me some basics.
Mm-hmm.
But I did definitely learn more when I started doing it on my own. When I was really inspired to start to play a lot, I just started experimenting. And one of the things that I found for any piano players that might be listening to this, I discovered a way of doing in what I call a basic rock rhythm, a bass chord, bass chord, that emulated a kick drum and a snare drum on a drum set. So kick, snare, kick, snare. And for people who are musical, they'll know what I'm talking about.
Right.
So I really developed that and started doing that a lot. And that has become a foundational thing that I've used a lot in so many situations over the years, which enables me to be, when I do accompaniment work just on piano only, which is what I kind of prefer to do. I can play with other musicians, but I like to do stuff on my own because I like to lay down that real solid rhythmic foundation, and that's what I'm comfortable doing.
Okay. Now, how did all of this lead into your involvement at the Playhouse, your eventual involvement at the Playhouse?
I'm trying to remember my friend Tony Vivo, who's the clerk of courts here in Mahoning County. He and I were good friends at school, at Boardman High School, and he enjoyed doing theater too. He was Barnaby in that in Hello Dolly when I was Horace Vandergelder at Boardman. And he had heard about some auditions at the Youngstown Playhouse. Hey, let's go down there and maybe try out for something or do something down there. So I remember getting a foot in the door, you know, coming down for some stuff there in relationship to that. And then it seems like somewhere along the line, Sandy Van Such had heard that I was around. I can't remember exactly. Oh, I know. I had met Maureen Collins doing Godspell at Youngstown State University in a production down there. And Maureen had been asked to music direct Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat here, one of the incarnations of that show. And she needed a little assistance with, you know, kind of helping organize the band and like doing some of the nuts and bolts in that respect. She was real good with the vocals and everything. So she had contacted me, and that was my foot in the door here.
Okay.
Yeah. So Joseph, and then from there, Sandy Van Such asked me to music direct a show, which I had never done. And it was called The Me Nobody Knows. It was a youth musical theater show. Did that, and then it wasn't long after that, then Phoebe Alexander, the late Phoebe Alexander, wonderful performer and director, was doing Evita. And so my first main stage thing then was, I was music director for Evita. A lot of stories connected with that.
Yeah, well, lead right into that. I was going to ask you, every performer, whether it's on stage, in the pit, backstage, whatever, has stories, has great theater stories. And we've had some great ones over the time we've been doing this. So.
Well, this just has to do with the fact that I was probably in my early 20s, I guess, at that time, and I had only had just this limited experience with doing any kind of musical direction. And so here's this massive show, which is all music, big Andrew Lloyd Webber score. And so I hired another keyboard player because I wanted, those were the early days of doing sounds on keyboards, synthesizers and stuff like that. And I had the great Teddy Pentalis play guitar. My old friend Rich Morrow from one of the bands that I had been in was doing drums. And the great Jeff Grubbs was on bass. Jeff Grubbs is a premier bass player for the Pittsburgh Symphony now, and was a great jazz player. So it was a really good group of musicians. We had my late dear friend Bob Fitzer doing woodwinds to give it that live kind of sound and live ambiance of musical instruments. So anyhow, I had a little synthesizer, and I was playing the regular piano then. It was back before good digital keyboards had arrived. So I was playing the regular piano they have in the pit and had my little keyboard set up on top of that as synthesizer. In the first act alone, I had to change the sound on my synthesizer 83 times. Oh, so here was a situation of trying to conduct the guys in the pit, playing the score, conducting what was going on stage, and having to do the technical changes. You know, it was really, really intense. I remember rehearsing. That's all I did then. I just rehearsed that show for, you know, whatever time I had to put into it. It was so intense that I remember setting up one of the names of the sound. I could punch in the names of the sounds into my little screen, and it was like a little prayer. It was called "Help Me" with an exclamation point. Every show I'd see that first thing. It's like, oh man, what did I get myself into? We pulled it off somehow.
And that night probably shot past so fast because you were so busy doing everything.
Oh gosh, yeah, it was. I don't remember that now. I just remember that every performance was pretty intense to get through it.
Do you have a favorite show that you've done here?
I
I'm
don't
going to
know.
ask you about one here in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah. I know I had a lot of fun with David Gendry. He was the director for A Chorus Line. And I remember that one being a lot of fun to do. And, you know, the music was fun. We had a good time with that, and a good cast. Had a lot of fun with both Joseph and, you know, and the Joseph shows. I think I did a couple of them here. The one that was after the one with Maureen was one that I music directed. That was great fun. Just a fun show. Of course, you know, the songs are fun in that show, and the cast was, again, really fun. Now,
I have a picture. We're going to put it up during the course of the interview or sometime. Of you in a show with Cher Hallis.
Yes.
I asked you about this picture. Tell us a little bit about that show and that picture, because it's a great photo. It's a great photo.
The show is called Breakfast with Les and Bess. A very, very unusual comedy. It was directed by, his name's escaping me now. I'll try to think of it later. He was a prominent man. Was his name Gray, maybe?
Bob Gray.
Bob Gray.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad I remembered that, and you helped me with that. Yes, Cher Hallis played the fiance. I think we were engaged to be married, from a wealthy family, New York aristocratic family that were very involved in New York society and culture. And I think my character was supposed to be a Mormon Navy guy, real, conservative, kid. And here he's just watching this family, and they're just the mother and father are radio personalities. They were based on some team of radio personalities that were prominent back in the day. And, hijinks breaks out because of all their arguments and their family dramas, and this kid's like drawn into this family drama. And that's kind of what that was about, and, just a lot of funny stuff happened from that.
Yeah. So. Now, you've been involved here both as a participant and an audience member for many years. What do you feel that the Playhouse means to this area?
Well, you have to consider that for the performers, for the kids that perform, it's a terrific opportunity, to have a stage, and that's what every performer needs is an opportunity to have a stage and have an audience. So on a very basic level, it's that simple. It's a stage, and it's an opportunity for people to get out and do what they love to do and have an audience to perform for. I think that for the people in the community, it's provided an excellent opportunity for them to see a wide variety of shows. Performed by people, in many cases, are family members or people from the media that happen to come in and do the show, or other people from amongst, from around the area and the community here, that they can come and see them in a whole different, scenario, watching them up on stage. And people really get a kick out of seeing people they know performing on stage if they've never seen them do that before.
Right. Need to take a quick break. I want to thank our sponsors again for this edition of On the Marquee, Dr. John Cox and the Photo Place over in Austintown. You work with young kids a lot.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And you teach piano, you teach voice, you teach give various kinds of musical lessons. What do you feel that a music education does for young kids?
The music education part of it, again, I guess on a very basic level, it gives some of the kids that want to pursue it and want to perform, it gives them an opportunity to become, it increases their ability to be a better performer, because even though some singers and many musicians, prominent musicians, do what they do by ear, and there have been many superstars who have made it with very little or no formal training, the fact of the matter is, if one has any degree of talent, for singing or for performing or acting or doing music, it's hard to argue that formal training can't enhance that and make it better for them. So the basic answer is that I think it gives them a better leg to stand on if they're interested in singing or performing music and playing.
Many of your students have gone on professional careers.
Well, most notably Mike Moritz. When he started working with me, he had a little bit of piano lessons, I think, prior to that, but I could see right away that he was interested in, as interested in doing, by the book and, and doing a whole lot of Western European style stuff, which was like me. And so I thought, well, I'll see if he can pick up some of the things that I like to do. And he did. I was able to teach him some of my fundamental techniques that I had picked up and taught myself. And then got him to learn how to do improvisational things. So at that time, he and his dad were really into Elton John. So he had a book of Elton John songs, and I remember using that and showing him how he could interpret the music that was on the page and then make it his own. And then he took to that really, really well. I
can see Mike doing that, yeah.
Years later, doing recording studio projects, I realized that Mike had a real aptitude for technical stuff, electronical things, and that wasn't my cup of tea. So I invited Mike to go to the recording studio and to assist me with preparing the technology to take stuff into the studio. We'd be well ahead of the game and already had a lot of the technical stuff of the orchestrations and stuff mapped out on the equipment that we were using. Mike helped me greatly with that when he was 12 years old.
Oh, wow.
And then when he would get into the recording studio, then he found that, wow, that just felt like home to him. And of course, a big part of his life has been involved in not just as an accompanist, of which he's become an accompanist in demand in New York City, but also a musical theater director. He of course did a lot of work here and over at Mooney High School with Joanne Smith, Carney Smith. And then, but I guess the point I was going to make is that the recording studio stuff became really prominent in his life as well.
Now, a lot of parents, and this goes even way back to when I was a kid, want to get their kids involved in piano lessons, whether the kid wants to do it or not. The parents sometimes will force the kid into doing piano lessons. What's your best advice to parents in manipulating is a bad word, but in getting their kids interested in music and how to handle that?
Well, most of the parents that I have that want their kids to do it tend to be families that have the kids involved in a lot of things. I found that out. Most of my students have huge schedules. I think I have a big schedule. My goodness, some of these kids. But anyhow, in some cases, it's a natural fit. In most cases, it's kind of forced. I encourage them to try to stay with it for a while and encourage them to see if and many kids then along the way will have a breakthrough where they'll come to a time where it's like they decide that they're really in. They're all in then. And then there are some cases where it's just not a good match, and some parents will fight the kid with it longer than others, fight the battle, so to speak. There are some cases where I'll just tell them, let's stop for a while. And I guess the key would be if after several weeks, a month or two, if you find that they never even go to the keyboard, they're not interested in it at all, that's kind of a sign. It's probably just not in the cards for them, so to speak. Right. But in other cases, some of those kids that seemed like they didn't want to do it and kind of fought it will kind of gravitate back to the piano, back to the keyboard. It's like there's some spark of interest there. And then we start them back up, and maybe because they're a little bit older, or things are changing for them, they can pick it up again, and in some cases it works.
Okay. Some time ago, you teamed up with Mary Jo Maluso and started a cabaret act. Now, how did that all come about?
At the time, in 1989, I was working with Todd Hancock and Maureen Collins, who had formed Easy Street Productions. At that time, we had just gotten into the old Uptown Theater, as many people around this area would remember that. And I had a keyboard set up out in the lobby. Don Creaky was in the process of building a set in the Uptown Theater. Meanwhile, Mary Jo Maluso's mother, Claire Maluso, was the Federal Plaza director in Youngstown. Somebody had given her a song from the archives, I think, of the Arms Museum, an old song that had been written many decades ago, called "I Want to Grow Old in Youngstown." Claire thought, and somebody had encouraged her to get this song recorded, that it might be a nice keepsake for the community. And so she asked Mary Jo if she would do it. Mary Jo at that time, for a number of reasons, hadn't been singing. So Claire encouraged her, hey, I've heard that they have a musical director up at the Uptown Theater, the kids that are doing the Easy Street Productions thing up there. Let's go up there, we'll talk to the guy and see what happens. So they made arrangements to come up. I didn't know Mary Jo, I knew who she was. I'd never met her. She knew Todd and Marquee, they all knew her, and everybody knew everybody, but she and I had never met. So I met her, was very impressed with her voice. She was very nervous about doing this because she hadn't sung for a while, but she sounded wonderful. I took this old song that they had and I rearranged it and contemporized it just a little bit. And Claire wanted us to go to the recording studio. We went to Old Peppermint Productions.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
They wanted Todd to do some backup vocals on it, so I coached him on that. And Mary Jo sang the song. And that's how we first met. Subsequently, at that point in time, neither of us were in a situation personally where we could be interested in one another on any level other than just professionally. But subsequently, about a half a year later, they came back into the picture. They'd come to see one of the shows that Easy Street was doing at the Uptown Theater. And Mary Jo and I spoke to one another then. And some magical sparks happened. And at that point in time, we were both in a situation where we could pursue seeing one another. And I pursued seeing her. And I got her to come back to see another show, and she did. And after that show, we went with the gang over to Chester's and got a bite to eat afterwards. And I was so impressed with how she interacted with everybody. I was so impressed with how kind she was to everyone, even the people that were a little bit different. And she made such a great impression. So afterwards, it was one of those nights where couples can remember other couples were not the only one, where you just sit and you could talk for the whole night, you know. We had one of those kind of situations where we just were engaged in conversation with one another. After that, the next day, I wanted to write a song about how cool it is to meet somebody that you really like, and the promise that it could become something more than that. As I sat down to write this song, I started reflecting about some of the stuff that we had talked about the night before and some of the difficulties that she had been going through in her personal life and issues and whatnot. This real dark, brooding kind of, chord progression kept coming out. It was so persistent that I couldn't shake it, and I thought, well, I think I'm supposed to go this direction with this song that I want to write. So I ended up writing this song that started out, it was from her point of view, based on stuff she had told me. And that was important because later in my life, most of the songs that I've written since then have been from her point of view and her perspective based on stuff that she's told me. And that particular song came out moving from the minor key into the promise of something really wonderful to come, and it was called I Can Start All Over Again. And I had to play that song for her. After I wrote this, it was an amazing, emotional, spiritual experience for me writing that song that night. And when I finished it, I knew that I had to share it with her. But she had gotten cold feet. What am I doing? I don't want to see this guy. This is the last thing I want, is to get involved with somebody. But I did something that I would normally never have done because I'm not a real persistent kind of a person. And back then with women, I wasn't at all. But I was persistent, and I got on the phone. I said, look, I got to share this with you. You're the only person I have. This was like an amazing emotional, spiritual experience I had writing this song. I know you don't even know me, but trust me, I want to play you the song. I will leave you alone, but I have to do this. She gave in and let me come over to my impassioned pleas. And I brought along a little cassette player, and I set it in front of her and had myself croaking the song out best I could. And when she was done hearing it, she's like, this is like my life story in this song. And it was my foot in the door, because what she had been going through and was a devastating prior experience. It took something like that, I believe, for her to open up just enough, to open the door enough to let me get my foot in the door. And I did. Immediately after that, she got gravely ill, and I couldn't see her. But finally she got over her flu or whatever it is that she battled through, and we connected up. And once we did, I had always had the dream that I wanted to have a woman in my life, that I would love to have somebody in my life that could sing, and we could partner together and do an act together. And she liked the idea of that as well, and so right away, as soon as we started seeing each other on a personal level, which was fraught with a lot of difficulties because of everything she had gone through, but I stayed the course. I wasn't going to budge. When I left her that first night, it was like, I turned the corner after leaving her house. I'm like, I love her. And that never wavered. And So we started putting an act together. Wasn't too long after we had met, she mentioned to me that she had a good relationship with a guy by the name of Bob Vargo. And I had heard of Bob Vargo. I'd even met him once or twice. And we talked to Bob, had a sat down and talked with him. He goes, hey, what the two of you are doing sounds to me like you're wanting to do true New York style cabaret. And we said, okay, I guess we do. I didn't really know what that was. He explained it. And it's basically a small act with maybe one or a couple musicians, usually in small rooms. You get together a group of songs, you theme together, have a theme, and you put it together as a themed act. Something that I always wanted to do, and that's what we did. With his assistance and his help, we then got in touch with Richard Alberini of the old Alberini's, legendary Alberini's restaurant in Niles, Ohio. He had a room, and we needed a stage manager, and he knew a guy by the name of Jack Ballantyne. And Jack became our stage manager, and we did shows at Alberini's, and then the Timberlanes in Salem, and then a lot of private shows around the area, and expanded it from there.
If you've never seen these two, you have to see them. They are fantastic.
Thank you.
Now, you guys had probably the most unique wedding I've ever been to. I was stage manager. How many weddings have a stage manager? Tell us a little bit about that wedding.
I had done so many weddings over the years, and to me they got to be kind of the same and kind of boring. No disrespect to any of them, but you know, they all were what they were. And I thought, man, if I ever do a wedding, if I ever get married, I want it to be totally distinctive and unique and something really different. So Mary Jo and I agreed that what we would do is we would make our wedding a cabaret show. So the invitations were, we called it It's All About Love. So it was like you were invited to It's All About Love, a musical marriage cabaret featuring Mary Jo Maluso and Rick Blackson. And I wrote all the songs for it, and we collected readings and so forth, and things that we believed in, and scriptures and whatnot that we believed in. And we assembled all of that, and we invited my nieces and our nieces and nephews, Mary Jo's as well, to be the readers and to read these readings. And I wrote original songs that I would sing and that she would sing from her point of view to me, and then a couple things that we would sing together. And we did have a stage manager. We were able to do the entire thing. We did it at Anthony's on the River, which is no longer there, a little restaurant down there in Youngstown. Joe Mineo put up a nice trellis, and we made it look real pretty and appropriate. We had Judge Teresa Delick do the officiating, and any of the prayers and the religious part of it, you know, we did ourselves. And so it definitely had that element to it, but it was really a fun, festive show. And people applauded during the show.
They did.
You know, and it was just real light and fun, and but definitely had its reverent moments as well.
Now, you have an uncanny ability to write a song, given an idea, really fast. Like, I'm sure you remember Steve Allen. In his old show, somebody would yell out something, and 10 seconds, 30 seconds later, he had this short little song. I mean, you do it on a much grander scale. You wrote the opening, the theme music for Images. How were you able to get what I needed with what I felt was just a little bit of information that I gave you for that, and it fit the show so perfectly?
Well, I think that a big part of it for me is when somebody wants me to write a song, more is better for me. I like to have a whole lot of information and facts, phrases, anything they can give me, because for me lyrics are really difficult. I have to really effort hard to craft lyrics together. So the more that I have to draw on, the better. But when it comes to the musical part of it, the musical theme, you did that. You gave me pretty good specifics, and you wrote down what the action was going to be, what was going to be happening during this music. So I was able to visualize it, I think, pretty well. And I think that that's what musicians do, songwriters do, is that we have somehow there's an ability to kind of start hearing something in our heads that sounds like it would be appropriate to that particular scene. And then I use the keyboard too, obviously, and I go to the keyboard and then I see where it wants to lead. And typically, if you start, and other musicians will know this, I don't want to bore everybody, but typically once the initial hook or theme or line is there that's strong, if it's a good one, the answer to that opening will typically follow. And so that's what happened. You know, you wanted it to start out very, very sparse, and then a little by little kind of layer it in, and then I wanted it to be reflective of what I perceived to be the Hebrew Jewish traditions, which I know very little about. I don't want to be pretentious, but I've heard enough music that I kind of have a sense of what that should kind of feel like and sound like. But then I wanted to also make it sound contemporary, because your character was in a present moment, but reflecting upon past things. So we wanted to try to, so I like to think that that's what I was going for, was a balance of something that sounded like it could be from another time, but then also have something that sounded real fresh and contemporary.
Well, it did. It worked. It worked. To move back to the Playhouse just for a second here, based on your involvement here and just, as I said, as a participant and audience member, as they move beyond the 100-year anniversary, what do you feel they need to do to stay relevant and to stay successful as they keep going here?
That's a tough one for me, because you know I've always just been the musical director, and I've had very little to do with decisions that are made behind the scenes on artistic selections and so forth. I guess I could just answer that by saying that it seems to me like the guy that's here right now, Jim McClellan, is a big part of that answer. Here's why I say that. It isn't just because of Jim's winsome personality and the fact that he's so well liked by people, but that's, I think, very helpful, obviously. It's the fact that Mary Jo and I don't know if we know anybody that knows more about musical theater than Jim does. I mean, he and his brother Eric, for years, if we needed a suggestion for a certain kind of a song, they'd be among the first people we would call and say, hey, you know, what do you think? Because we know that they really stay very current with what's going on. And they know, I personally don't, people may be surprised about this, I know musical theater because I've had to do it. It's not because I seek it out. I'm not really, I sound like an iconoclast here, I'm not really the biggest musical theater fan. In fact, I rarely listen to any music because I do it all day long. It's my job. So the last thing I want to do is turn on the radio and listen to music. I listen to sports talk, you know, that's what I do, or news sometimes. If I do listen to music, it tends to be WYSU classics, you know, that's just relaxing and great stuff. I like jazz, but I don't really listen to it or seek it out anymore like I used to. But that Jim, that's his area. So it needs direction from somebody who has a sense of the history of musical theater, which he certainly does, and is current, and tries to find a way to bring those elements together, and that will keep it stimulating, but at the same time have respect for the old.
Okay. Well, Rick, I thank you for stopping in.
Been my pleasure.
It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Jack.
And I want to thank you for joining us for this edition of On the Marquee, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.